we will start with Pavlo Kovtoniuk, who is a co-founder of Ukrainian Healthcare Center, a nonprofit think tank on health systems in Ukraine. In the last 5 years, Pavlo Kovtoniuk was consultant for WHO Health Systems Office. He was also a deputy minister of health in Ukraine and was a part of the team who started radical healthcare reform in Ukraine. His organization actually has been working really hard to document all the attacks on healthcare facilities, and he will share with us what he learned so far and how we can help. Thank you, Pavlo.
Thank you, Nelia, and thank you for having me here. I will probably start with saying that I would never imagine that I will be on a webinar like this, speaking about things like this, about hospital attacks, which I was kind of forced to start documenting in my life. Actually, I am a person with a background in health management. I work as a deputy minister of health. Back in 2016, we made a huge health reform in Ukraine, really big and radical one, implemented single-payer system, universal health care in the country, made a lot in primary care, in many other things. And later, after quitting ministry, I founded my own organization, actually promoting reform processes and transformation processes here in Ukraine in order to modernize our country in our aspirations to integrate into European Union and generally into the kind of civilized Western world, as we call it in Ukraine. But then kind of the life changed quite dramatically. It happened this year, February 24. Of course, I remember this day very well. I was in my flat in Kyiv, 5 a.m. in the morning. I heard very loud explosions because I live in a place near two large airfields where Russian paratroopers were attempting to land in the very first day of invasion. Mark showed you the today's front line in the east and in the south, but at the very beginning, Russians advanced from all of directions, except probably for the western part of the country. So that was a large-scale invasion. And the first explosions happened in many places, including near my home. And yeah, that was, I don't want to, remember that time, but many people and myself, we are trying to do only one thing, to get our families into safety. I have a small kid and my wife, we jumped into the car and moved to the western part of the country and tried to settle down there. And actually it took some time for us to find a place to be there. And then initial plan was that I will be back to Kyiv, but the situation evolved in a way that it was hardly possible because Kyiv at that time was half encircled and there was a possibility that it will be fully encircled. And I decided to stay in Lviv, in the western part of the country, because I understood that in an event of encirclement of my home city of Kyiv, there will be no use of me of being there. And also in Lviv, I was able to reassemble the part of my team, and we decided we should do something for the country and for the war at that time. And one of the things we were doing, except for volunteering and doing all the other stuff, was just intuitively to fixing the events of attacks on health facilities, which we found in the news. So we would just kind of automatically started to fill a kind of Excel spreadsheet on that. And we didn't know at that time that it will grow into the large project, large direction in our work, which we are currently doing in Ukraine and on documenting hospital attacks, on which I want to tell you more. When Russians retreated from Kyiv, and it happened in early April, on April 7th, they retreated. I took my wife and I took my family, and we decided we want to get back to our city. It was very scary, and that was not a very user-friendly place to live at that time, kind of post-apocalypse, city. But we decided that we need to be there together with our home and together with our city, and we moved back. And what I started to do, and a couple of people who from my team of Ukrainian Healthcare Center who were also back to the city, we started not only to document attacks on health facilities from the open sources, but we started to visit the places. So we jumped into our cars and we started to go all around the Kyiv Oblast and nearby oblasts. Oblast is a region, right? In order to write stories, right? To recreate the stories of these potential war crimes, many of which are real war crimes. And I will tell you later why. And one of the places which I visited first was this place, which you can see on the screen. This is a primary care center in the small town of Makariv, 20 kilometers from Bucha, which you probably know about, and 40 kilometers from Kyiv. Makariv was never occupied because it was very well defended and Russians didn't manage to penetrate it, unlike Bucha and unlike Irpin. But it was also a scene of appalling war crimes. First of all, it was kind of indiscriminate and chaotic shelling of the town. And one of the places which was hit was this primary care center. Why this center? Because when I was Deputy Minister of Health, I visited this place because this place was built during the health reform we were promoting. And that was one of many primary care centers which were built from the scratch, the new centers in small communities which increased access for people to primary care, and I opened the center actually. And by the way, during the COVID pandemic, it was the vaccination site, mass vaccination center, and you can see here the sign saying vaccinate, get your vaccine here, right? Because that was, for this small community, it was a vaccination place. So I read in the news about this center, and again, I jumped into my car with my colleagues and we went onto the site. And what we saw was this. This is the video I made on the center. We found this place totally obliterated, totally demolished to the ground. What was interesting about this scene is that all the nearby territory was also hit by some artillery or whatever, but the picture of this was very different. And this center was clearly distinguished, had a very distinguished picture, right, of attack. After which we made a conclusion that this primary care center was targeted, right? It was not kind of collateral damage, but somebody would intentionally do that. And we started to investigate. It was our first investigation. We started to investigate into that case. And we found out that we saw a clear picture of a very important type of attacks, which is called targeted attacks. When the Russian troops saw what was it and targeted it intentionally. And they did it with this type of weapon, which is called mortar. Unfortunately, now I need to know about all this type of weapons. You probably don't know that, and lucky you that you don't. I do. And we got to know about it because we found all the traces of this very highly probable war crime. We found these holes from mortar shells situated one from another at a distance approximately 10 meters, it's kind of 30 feet, right? And that said to us that that was mortar fire because that was corrected. From mortar fire, you make shots from about 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers, and then you correct the fire. There is another person who is watching in the binocular or from the drone and says to the person who is firing that make one step further, and then make one step further. And we found 5 actually corrections. They needed actually 6 attempts until they finally hit this place. What is more important is that they saw what they were hitting because they had this spotter and they had also people who knew perfectly well that they're shelling the primary care facility, the healthcare facility clearly designated. So there are at least 5 people in the team in this brigade of mortar who did that, and one of them was commander, the other was spotter, and they knew what they did. We also identified the potential place of this fire, and hopefully soon we will also identify the unit and the names of the perpetrators. Then we started to travel all around the country, especially in the north, and we found other patterns of attacks. One of them, the most common one in Ukraine, was indiscriminate bombing. Is when you don't actually target specific object, but you bomb everything you see in front of you in hope, I don't know, whatever hope they had, but in this case, which I'm going to tell you about, there was no justifiable or reasonable target for that. That is the city of Chernihiv, north to Kyiv, 300,000 population, quite a big and beautiful city. And then on March 3, in 20 p.m., the plane flew over this place and dropped 8 large unguided bombs, called dumb bombs, because they cannot be guided in any specific direction. They just fall at a very approximate place, you cannot target anything with them. And the plane dropped at least 8 bombs on the city center of Chernihiv. 2 bombs were dropped into the yard of the cardiac center, the regional cardiac center, and this center was actually demolished, and you can see it on your screen. But even more horrific is that the nearby apartment buildings and residential houses were also heavily affected. We actually were able to identify all of those bombs from the dashcam video which we obtained, and we recreated also the whole scene of the attack. And 4 apartment buildings, large apartment buildings, were affected. 47 people were killed by this plane, by this pilot, and those people mostly were outside in the queue to the pharmacy, waiting in the morning, and and most of them died because of that shelling. No military objects, no other justified objects could not be identified whatsoever. That was just a random dropping bombs in the very city center. Moreover, we found another pattern of attack, which is especially horrific pattern, which is use of cluster munitions. Cluster munitions are prohibited by the international law, by the special convention, because cluster munitions are designed to kill people indiscriminately. So they are designed for that. This is a munition which is then opens, and submunitions fly out of this, and then they explode, and then shrapnel of this submunitions kills everyone around. And those cluster munitions were used multiple times in Chernihiv Oblast especially, and also in Kharkiv. Here to the right you can see one of the villages near Chernihiv where we identified the remnants of cluster munitions. This is me holding the remnants of cluster munitions. And here is the place, the children's hospital, the regional children's hospitals with kids inside, which was attacked indiscriminately by cluster munition. I remind you, this is the munition designed to kill people indiscriminately in large amounts. And this is the 5th floor to the right. You can see the photo, 5th floor, hole in the window and a piece of shrapnel, which hit more than 200 of windows in this hospital. Luckily, 10 minutes before this, the air raid siren was over. It was this attack was without air raid siren, without any sign of the attack approaching. But before that, in the morning, there was an air raid alert, and children were in the basement, and they didn't come to their wards yet before this attack came. That was luck, and that was a miracle that all the kids remained alive. But in the nearby area, at least 3 children were heavily injured, and also a lot of adults. And this hospital would admit both kids and adults. And these are pictures from the director of this hospital, and also the shrapnel they took out of the people actually who were admitted to this hospital. What I can say to you in conclusion. In conclusion, I can say that the most frequent question I receive when I tell the stories, and this is the only small proportion of the stories we gathered, most of the people ask me, and most of the journalists ask me, why? Why do you think Russians are doing that? And I think in order to answer this question, we don't need to go through these cases one by one. You need to see the larger pattern. And the larger pattern is the following, that those attacks are really, really massive. 189 attacks we have fixed from the beginning of the invasion. 164, most of them happened during the first phase of the invasion, before I came to Kyiv, in the first 42 days of the invasion. That means that 4 to 6 attacks on hospitals happened every day. So this is all you need to know about why, and about what happened. What happened was a deliberate and massive destruction of healthcare sphere in Ukraine. When healthcare sector is destroyed so massively, there is a consequences for that. And the main consequence for that is insecurity. The huge insecurity, because hospitals are a special place which is operating even during the war, and people need to feel secure there. But when you attack hospitals en masse, people feel insecure, profoundly insecure, and they start to flee. And Mark showed you the largest since World War II number of refugees which the European continent observed. And this has the name, this tactic has a name, and the name is terror. When you use civilian objects and civilian livelihoods as a means of warfare in order to create insecurity and in order to create people fleeing, it is called terror. And the perpetrator who is doing terror is called terrorist. But why terror? Why it happens? It happens because of impunity, because Russia has done that before, in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Ukraine in 2014, and in Syria. And in order to get the understanding of that, just look at these statistics. The coalition forces in Syria, including the US, committed attacks on hospitals, 4 attacks in all of the years of presence there. ISIS committed 10 attacks. Russia committed 244 attacks. So already in Syria, they used hospitals, they used healthcare not as a collateral, victim of the warfare, but as a means of warfare. But we did nothing, And this impunity was showed in Ukraine. The guy who bombed the Chernihiv city center on March 3 and the cardiac center was actually taken prisoner because his plane was down and he was taken prisoner. And what the Ukrainian security services have found is that he did that in Syria, actually. And you can see his picture to the left, together with Bashar Assad, the dictator of Syria, and together with Vladimir Putin, and together with Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister of Russia. So what we should do, and this is my last slide. First of all, we should understand what we see and what we encounter. And we encounter terror, and we encounter the terrorist state. And the world and the United States must recognize that. Second, in order to come out of it as a civilized people, we should militarily and politically defeat these terrorists. Just imagine if Russia wins this war, what will happen then? That would be a disaster. Then, third, we need to protect the fundamental values, including that healthcare should be safe. And I can make another whole lecture on that international organizations, including the World Health Organizations, miserably failed in doing that. And last but not least is justice. One day or the other, the justice should be implemented, but it only can happen if Russia will be defeated militarily and politically. Thank you for your attention. That's all from my side. Over to you guys.